Hi guys, this is Mrs. Allgood. We're going to talk about our animal behavior day 2 notes. This is for 3rd and 4th blocks, hopefully, because of the snow day. Okay. So first we're going to talk about directed movements. In the hopes that our pill bugs will still be alive next week to be able to do our pill bug lab, we need to know the difference between kinesis and taxis. And then migration really doesn't play a role in the pill bug lab, but I think you're already aware of what migration is. And if I ever go too fast, feel free to pause the video. All right, we're going to move on. All right, let's talk about kinesis. Okay, so you might have heard that root word in something like telekinesis, which is where people can believe that they can move things with their minds. Okay, that'd be like telekinesis. What we mean by kinesis here is a simple change in activity or turning rate in response to a stimulus. So when we do our pill bug lab, we're going to be putting 5 pill bugs on the wet side of a choice chamber, which is what this whole thing's called. And we're going to put 5 pill bugs on the dry side. And then we're going to count how many are on each side every 30 seconds for 10 minutes. So if you think about where you find pill bugs in nature, you tend to find them under rocks, under logs. They like to be under something, and that tends to be a more moist or wet environment. And so we might expect that there would be more pill bugs on the wet side than the dry side. Well, anyway, if they don't like where they are, so if they don't like being on the dry side, you're not going to see them just make a beeline to the wet side. You're going to see them increase their movement in order to increase the chance that they'll move out of this dry area over to the wet side. So it's not just like a straight line to where they want to be. They just have to keep moving more, and it tends to look like they're meandering. Let's talk about our pill bugs. They can be called sow bugs. They can be called isopods. They're similar to pill bugs and roly-polies. We know that we find them in more moist environments. So we tend to see them become more active in dry areas and less active in humid or moist areas. Now that seems to go against what you'd think. You think, well, if they're not happy in the dry area, why would they be moving more? Well, they're moving more to increase their chances that they'll get out of that dry area and into the wet area. So when they're in the area they want to be in, they're not going to be as active. They're not going to move as much. And so as it says here, they're not moving toward or away from specific conditions. They're not doing a straight line towards where they want to be, but their increased activity in those dry areas is going to increase the chance that they will leave a dry area and find a moist area. Like they're basically saying, like, if I keep moving, eventually I'm going to get out of this area and be in the area that I want to be in. Okay, so once they get to the area they want to be in, so maybe they're moving, and they finally find that moist or wet area, they're going to slow down there, okay, because they're happy there. So they're not going to want to move, or else that might mean that they will get out of that area that they like to be in. So I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to show you a little picture of kinesis on our next slide, and then we're going to contrast that with taxis. And we're going to see how taxis is different. Okay? So look at your picture here. This is your little pill bug or your roly-poly, and it's in this dry, open area, and they don't really like to be there that much. So you're going to see this, what we said was an increase in turning activity. So increase in turning activity, turning activity, turning activity, okay? And then they're going to end up under that leaf. Okay, so once they get under that leaf, that's where they want to be. And so we're not going to see them moving a whole lot once they get to where they want to be. So now let's contrast kinesis with taxis. So whenever I see that word taxis, I think of like a taxi. Okay. If you get into a taxi or an Uber or a Lyft, in a big city, that taxi is going to take you directly to where you want to go. Okay? It's not going to meander around New York City and take you all around town. It's going to take you directly to where you ask them to take you. Okay? And so that's how taxis is different from kinesis. It's not a meandering or a wandering. It is an automatic, oriented movement either towards a stimulus, which would be positive taxis. And if you haven't heard that word taxis before, you've probably heard it with a prefix, like chemotaxis or phototaxis. Or it could be a movement away from a given stimulus, and that would be a negative taxis. Okay? So we're going to look at an example of phototaxis first. So a euglena is a little photosynthetic protist. So it is eukaryotic, but it's photosynthetic and it's unicellular. And so this is what a euglena looks like under the microscope, and all that green that you see in there is due to its chloroplast. Okay, it carries out photosynthesis. It's got this little red area here, which is an eye spot that detects light, and so it also has a flagellum, so it can move that flagellum, and it will move itself to an area with more light so it can maximize its rate of photosynthesis. Okay, so that's an example of positive phototaxis. It's moving itself towards a light source. Okay, whereas cockroaches tend to move away from a light source. And I'll show you a little video clip for that if I can get that to work. All right, so let me see if this video will come up. I don't know if my sound's up. So in case you want to see that again. So the cockroach there is demonstrating negative phototaxis. Okay, it's trying to get away from the light. All right, let's talk about chemotaxis. So on the last slide, we talked about phototaxis. On this slide, we're talking about chemotaxis. This is a movement toward or away from certain chemicals. And it's going to rely on specific receptors to be present on cells. So an example here is with E. coli. Now we know that E. coli resides in our gut, in our intestines. And so they're going to rely on some of the food we eat to get their own nutrition. And so they might be looking for something like glucose. So E. coli will exhibit a positive chemotaxis when it moves toward a higher concentration of food such as glucose. And then any animal or organism might exhibit negative chemotaxis when it moves itself away from chemicals such as a poison. And so chemotaxis is also important in our immune response. So if you've taken anatomy and maybe you've learned about inflammation, we talk about chemotaxis there, that your white blood cells will use chemotaxis to find and hunt out a bacteria cell and to gobble that up. And sperm cells also use chemotaxis when they're trying to find the egg. Okay, so I think I've shown you this video before back when we talked about phagocytosis, but it's still worth showing here. So remember, these are red blood cells, that's a white blood cell, and the little thing is a bacterium. So it's chasing the bacterium due to chemotaxis, due to chemicals that the bacterium's giving off. Okay, I just love that. Okay, anyway, let's see what's next. All right, let's talk about migration. So this is also a directed movement, and I know you're familiar with what migration is. So this is going to be a seasonal movement of animals from one region to another. And so think about what we talked about in the biome presentations, like with your animals that live on the savanna, especially your herbivores, that on the savanna or tropical grasslands, they have a rainy season and a dry season. So during that dry season, a lot of your herbivorous animals are going to migrate to find a place with more water. And they're going to look for those watering holes. So we saw migration with our savanna biome that we discussed. Okay, so the whole point of doing migration is to be able to access food resources throughout the year. So whether it's a change in seasons like we have here, like winter to spring, or if it's just a rainy season and a dry season, they may have to move somewhere else to access appropriate food or water. Okay, it's going to also allow them to live or breed in areas that favor survival. All right, so let's talk about foraging behavior. So when you forage, we tend to think of foraging as like looking for food. So this is any mechanism that an animal might use to search for, recognize, and capture food. You're foraging if you're looking for food. So then we can split our foragers into a couple of different categories. Okay, we can call them generalists. If an animal is a generalist, that means it eats just about anything, whether it's alive or dead. So crows would be an example of that. All right, then we also have specialists. Specialists are your more picky eaters. So think about something like a koala that only feeds on eucalyptus. Okay, the fact that they only feed on eucalyptus, that's going to limit where they can live. And so most animals tend to fall somewhere between generalists and specialists, kind of middle of the road there. So there is something called the optimal foraging theory, which to me is more like common sense. It says that an animal's feeding behavior should provide maximal energy gain with minimal expense and minimal risk of being eaten while foraging. Okay, so basically it's saying, hey, if you're going to go out and look for food, let's do so in a way that you get the most energy out of it and the least risk at getting killed while you go look for food. That's really all that optimal foraging theory is trying to say. Okay, let's keep moving. All right, let's talk about agonistic behavior. Okay, so when I hear these next two slides, when I hear agonistic behavior, I tend to think of like an antagonist in a story that you might read in your English class. And so to me, that reminds me of that. So this is when conflicts over food, space, or mates among members of the same species are settled with threats, rituals, or combat. So think back to when we did our biotic relationship presentations, okay? And we talked about intra-specific competition, okay? Competition between members of the same species. A lot of times that was competition between males, whether that's fighting over territory, whether that's fighting over mates. That would fall underneath the heading of agonistic behavior. Okay, so let me show you some examples there. So think about this in terms of natural selection, though. Natural selection's not really going to favor these animals fighting to the death. They're going to favor other ways of intimidating the other animal, but not going so far as to kill them. So that's why we often see of posturing, pushing, shoving. There's animals that make themselves like appear larger. All of those would be favored by natural selection as opposed to fighting to the death. So on the left there, you see some male kangaroos showing agonistic behavior. And then remember I showed you that clip of the giraffes participating in agonistic behavior when they swing their necks like that. That's usually to see who's going to get to mate with the female. So once again, this is agonistic behavior. We typically see this between like males competing to be the alpha male among the same species, among a population. Okay, then we're going to look at altruistic behavior. So maybe in your English class, maybe you've heard of altruism. Okay. We think of this, I don't want to say sacrificing yourself for the group because it doesn't mean you have to die. It means you are putting yourself more at risk for the benefit of your population. So you're sort of, you're doing this for the greater good. You're sort of taking one for the team. But again, it doesn't mean that you have to die. The classic example for this is when an animal gives a warning call, like when it sees a predator. That's going to draw more attention to that animal and put it more at risk of being eaten. And then that allows the other members of the population to go run and hide. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean that that animal giving the warning call is going to die. It just means they're putting themselves more at risk to save the rest of their population. That is considered altruistic behavior. So we say for the greater good. Okay, so let's keep moving. Next is signaling between animals. So we have chemical signaling, which usually involves pheromones. Okay, pheromones we think of as like the way that you attract a mate, but I'll show you on the next slide. There's other reasons that pheromones might be used. It can be used to mark territory. It can actually be used as a warning signal. Okay, then there can be auditory signaling, and that's typically like songs or calls that we know, like birds might have to know to sing a certain song. Even some animals have a call that is unique to their species. Okay, so we're going to take a look at pheromones first and the different types of pheromones that there are, and then we'll take a look at auditory signaling. Okay, so pheromones are chemicals emitted by mammals and insects that act as chemical communication signals. So they might be for a warning, they might be to mark territory, or they might be there to attract a mate. And they are often species specific. So what's kind of neat is depending on what the pheromone is supposed to do, that will usually dictate what kind of chemical is involved. So pheromones that act as alarm signals are going to be highly volatile, diffusible, meaning that they're going to be able to spread quickly, which makes sense if it's a warning call. If it's a warning signal, it needs to be able to spread rapidly. And it doesn't need to stick around long, or else the reason for the warning has probably passed on. Okay? So they spread quickly, but they also disappear quickly. Okay, your territory marking pheromones don't tend to travel very far, but they tend to stick around for a long time. So if you've ever taken your dog for a walk and he or she, especially he, has felt the need to mark his territory when he passes by any mailbox, okay, that's because he smells the scent of the other dogs there. They do stick around for a long time. If you've had cats that have peed in the house, you know that cat pee smell sticks around for a long time. Okay, those are territory marking pheromones. And then reproductive pheromones can travel a little farther, and they stick around for a while too. Okay, so they kind of can travel and they can stick around for a longer amount of time. Okay, and then the last one we're going to look at in this section is auditory signaling. Okay, it just says the songs of most bird species are at least partially learned. Songs in insects are largely under genetic control, and this signaling tends to influence mating behavior. So I know that there's still more to fill in your packet about bees and coloring. So I will make another video if I can, but I'm going to make these in 2 different segments. So we're going to end this video, and I will probably do another one for signaling in bees. Okay, thanks for listening.